Thanks for joining us at Winning at Selling Podcast. I'm Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute, and with me is Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems.
In coaching and training salespeople, I often ask them what they dislike most about their job. The number one answer, cold calling or prospecting. I'll be the first to admit that it can be hard and frustrating work. But if you don't learn to do it well, you will never succeed in sales. So pull out that list of prospects as Scott and I discuss Sales Process Part 3, Prospecting, and other great ideas on episode 463 of the Winning at Selling podcast.
So this will be a great topic. Before we get into the prospecting subject, let's talk about Chapter 3 of Qualifying Opportunities, page 46 to 62 out of the book, Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. And if it's not too late to purchase this book, it's not too late to get caught up. We broke this chapter down into two halves because it's a thick chapter loaded with content. Bill and I had to really look at the highlights to be able to concentrate on what was most important on this chapter. So we really encourage you to go out and get this book. One thing that really kind of piqued my interest is right off the bat in the first paragraph. It says that one research firm estimates that 65% of the salespeople are pursuing worthless leads, yet they frequently respond to the failure is to increase the number of opportunities pursued rather than to qualify the qualification process. And this is one of those decisions that we have to make and go, working harder is not necessarily going to give us the results. Bill, what do you think?
Well, I think it's amazing how many people just forge ahead. We're going to talk about prospecting later, so I don't want to get into it, but so many people think prospecting is talking, and so many people think selling is telling. What this chapter really identifies is a great questioning process that then identifies, do I have a qualified lead here, or is this just a nice conversation?
And one of the most important things with salespeople is to really be effective and efficient when you're talking with prospects, because that efficiency is going to build on your reputation, and that effectiveness is going to get you the results that you want in the shortest period of time with the highest closing ratio possible.
Well, he goes through an opportunity checklist, which I think is interesting. Issues, evidence, impact, context, constraints. And I think what's important, and I do a similar checklist when I'm working with a client or with their sales team, and we start looking at their sales funnel. The first thing I ask them is, do you know what the problem is here? And quite often they've done a proposal. It's somewhere in the sales process, been sitting there for 6 months, and they didn't figure any of this stuff out. They have absolutely no idea what's going on. It's just the guy was kind of interested and they did a proposal. And we talked in the last chapter about how much time and effort is spent filling out RFPs that aren't valid. Same thing happens with proposals. If we don't know this information, how can we create a proposal that's focused and hits the issues that this client is trying to solve?
And the next step in the opportunity checklist is the evidence. So how do we define the problem, and how do we measure the success of the problem, which I think is really important. And then the third one is the impact. So what are the financial or intangible costs or benefit of it? And then the context, who or what else is affected by the issues of the solution? And then lastly is the constraints, which is what has stopped or might stop the organization from resolving the issue. I think the first question is, what problems or results is the client trying to address? And when I meet with companies for the first time, I ask them, what problems do you solve? And they seem to have a tough time answering that question. And the reason I ask it is because that is the essence of their value proposition. And that's my goal working with the sales team, is to amplify the value proposition and to make it easier when you're qualifying prospects and also when you're prospecting, which also incorporates with our next topic.
Yeah, I think it's so important to find out what's going on in this organization. And he's put it into these 5 issues. If you don't go through these, you're not going to achieve the perfect solution, which is what we're trying to get to with any customer. We know we're not going to get all the way there, but if we don't go through these 5 things, we're not going to get ourselves closer.
2 other techniques that he talked about was chunking it down, which I thought was, pretty interesting, which is just breaking it down into a smaller amount And then another technique that he talked about was rolling it up, which is magnifying it and looking at the greatest cost possible with something that is just minute to begin with.
Absolutely. You have to get the customer to a point where they're understanding in their own terms what the cost of the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
And you can either chunk it down into smaller segments or you can roll it up into a big total package. Either way, they have to get to the point where they understand not only the cost of it, but the cost of not making a decision.
Yeah. And that's a decision that they make, that they're making a decision. The decision is not to do anything, which is a poor decision. And hopefully they end up realizing that that's the bad decision. One other thing that they mentioned, and I love this line, it says, remember, the goal is not to get them. The goal is to get real. So we're not trying to trap the prospect when we're asking questions into this gotcha type of moment. We're working with them for them to get real about making a change towards pain or gain. And pain, and they talked about pain, and I use an acronym for pain. The P stands for problem. The A stands for attributes. The I stands for impact, and the N stands for numbers. The numbers are the cost. What is the cost of this pain? We translate the pain into a number, the cost. That cost is compared to the price of the solution. The difference is value. So when they go over these 5 levels, they're talking about the impact, and then they're getting into what is the context and the constraints, which can be interpreted as the cost. The cost is going to be compared to the price. The difference is value.
One of the big things he talks about in here is the 5 golden questions. And I am such a believer in planning out the questions that you want to ask and what direction. And these are the sorts of things that aren't going to come to you on the fly. They're going to have to be planned around. And so you can use these 5 questions, these 5 golden questions, to talk about the solution and what they want to do and find out value. And the 5 golden questions are: 1, how do you measure it? How do you measure what the solution should be? What is your current solution? What is it now? And number 3, what would you like it to be? And then number 4 is really important. What is the value of the difference? So what you have now and what you want, what is the value between those two? And then what is that value over time, which is kind of that rolling it up. So if it's a 2 or 3 year time period and the value is 100,000, now even in a 3-year time period, you have a $300,000 solution that needs to happen. And that can make your solution look much less expensive, provide more ROI, I guess is a better way of saying that.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, in the chapter, he used the term management by walking around. Do you remember where that originated, Bill?
I can't remember what author, but I have heard that.
It was Tom Peters.
Okay.
In Search of Excellence, he talked about management by wandering around. And they used that term in quotes. And I thought, wow, that's kind of a flash from the past and incorporating that into a modern book. So it was great that, he gave him credit for that. Another thing that you mentioned is that gap between the solution and the problem, and filling that gap in the 5 levels, the 5 golden questions, is we just need to sell the gap. They may be 80% there. A perfect solution is 100%. We just need to sell 20%. And
Right.
That's going to make the biggest difference. It's just to understand the gap, fill the gap. The gap is a solution. That's the value that they're looking for.
And you're going to get there through questioning, not through telling.
Exactly. This segment has been brought to you by the Jumpstart Sales Coaching Program, presented by your host of the Winning at Selling podcast. Every professional athlete has a coach, someone to assist and advise. Tiger Woods had 4 swing coaches so that he could stay at the top of his game. What would you like to improve or overcome in the next year? Perhaps as a salesperson, you want to be more productive with your prospecting, overcoming objections, or delivering more effective presentations. As a sales manager, you want to create a spark within your sales team with a new message, a refreshed approach to starting new conversations with prospects, or you are looking for market-ready strategies to increase revenue and shorten the sales cycle with your existing team. Or as a business leader, you want to transform the sales culture and your value proposition for the new marketplace. Whatever your reason, this is the perfect time to engage with an experienced sales coach. That is why your hosts of Winning at Selling podcast, Professor Scott Plum and Bill Hellkamp, have developed the Jumpstart Sales Coaching Program. Now you can receive personal coaching from the same sales professionals you enjoy on this podcast. It all starts with a discussion to give us insights into your specific goals, challenges, needs, and motivation. Go to winningatselling.com to contact Bill or Scott about the Jumpstart Sales Coaching Program. Do you believe you deserve better results? Now is the time to invest in yourself, your people, and your customers, and invest in your future.
Well, we are into our own sales process, part 3. We're not quite to qualifying because we haven't gotten the appointment yet. And prospecting is the process of contacting likely buyers to see if we can generate enough interest in our product or service so they'll meet for a longer business discussion. And how we do that and the options we have around that, that's what we want to discuss today.
Sure.
How do we get hold of people, right? Those are the options we have. We've always got the phone, but people are telling me it's getting harder to get hold of people over the phone. Do you hear that from your clients?
I do, but at the same time, I don't think they really try often enough to get us hold of somebody on the phone. I think if you call them more than once, I think you're increasing your chances of talking with them. But I just think that we call them once and we hang up and we leave a message and we never follow up and nothing ever happens. And then, and the prospect is thinking, I don't know who this is. They'll leave a message. And if they don't leave a message, then it must not be important. And guess what? The prospect's right, because the salesperson never follows up because it's not important. So how can the prospect buy if it's not important?
Right. And you should have a process that, maybe you call 2 or 3 times without leaving a message because you're just trying to get hold of the person, and then you're finding out they don't answer their phone. So now after 3 or 4 tries, you're going to leave a variety of message, not the same message over and over again, but a variety of message with some kind of contact information or something that's trying to get them to be interested. But if that doesn't work over time, you have other options. And I'm finding these other options, for me, people use different communication tools. So perhaps you want to email them. So if you can find out their emails. So now you've got a system that might be making a few phone calls, leaving some messages, dropping an email. If you can get hold of their cell number rather than their landline or their office number. And I think we're going to move away from office phone systems here fairly soon. Many people don't even use their office phone. They only use their cell. If you don't have my cell number, you shouldn't be talking to me, right?
Right.
So can you text them? Because many people, I found that for clients that know me, they want to text. They'll answer my text all the time. So for follow-ups and long-term and getting back to old customers, texting is a good way to do that. And then another tool that you might have is social media. LinkedIn, if you have people that you've met on LinkedIn, if you can design a message that's valuable, you can just contact them right through LinkedIn and perhaps be able to get an appointment that way.
Right. And to learn a little bit more about them so you can be relevant too. And when you have that first conversation, it's a great chance to build and trust rapport. Well,
the relevance about them is right there on the screen in front of you.
Yeah.
Which you don't always have when you're just calling off a list, right? Pulling a page out of the phone book, as it were, and making some phone calls. So other options that you think of?
Oh, no, I think those are great ones. We can always mail them something. I mean, we still have an option of doing that. We've got their address.
I forgot old snail mail.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a proponent of faxing anymore because I don't think that happens. And when a fax shows up in my email and I don't have a fax email, I know it's a virus, so I don't even answer it.
That's right.
So that doesn't work. But just working on being persistent. I think when you're finding that you've got a good prospect, and we've talked about qualifying on the last episode, when you know you've got a good prospect, it's important to be persistent. That persistent is a demonstration of your commitment, and that commitment is a demonstration of the value that you offer to them. And they're going to see that with how persistent you are. So we never can forget about that.
I have a friend of mine, she's been a speaker for some of our organizations, Deb Brown, and she believes in using snail mail, but also becoming very creative in how you do that. And she seems to get calls back that way. So don't just send a letter in a plain envelope. There's all kinds of tools and tricks that you can use to get somebody to open that and perhaps catch their attention through the way that they open or what they get in the mail. So I think it can be a good, valid option, but it's expensive. So you have to be
It can
willing
be.
to make an investment if you're going to send them something rolled up in a tube or something that's three-dimensional that has to go in a bubble envelope of some kind. All that adds to the expense of the mailing. So I think she's even sent objects like balls
Right.
by just putting an address and finding out how much it costs and not even putting it in a box, just sending it that way. So very creative ways of doing that to catch their attention. And that's really what prospecting is about. Can I get you to pay enough attention so that we can start to have a conversation?
And what are some of the outcomes of the conversation? What's the goal and possibilities of a conversation? And there's a few of them. Sometimes it's not just moving to the next step. And sometimes we go, well, if they're not going to say yes, then it's a dead end. No, that's not true. There's many outcomes that could come upon a conversation with a prospect. You could talk about what are their current problems or goals, so that you're finding out what's relevant to them. You could talk about past problems that they had and the current solutions they applied to those past problems. So now you know a little bit about what they're looking for. You maybe get an idea on how much money they're willing to spend on a solution. And you might even uncover what process they go through on making a decision for a solution. So those are all good outcomes. You could ask for a referral to somebody else. You can get information on when the contract is expiring. Like you said earlier, get their email address, their direct phone number if you got transferred through a general number, and then connect with them on LinkedIn. And when you connect with them on LinkedIn, you're able to find out different changes that are going on within that organization too. And you might find that your contact, your prospect, the reason they weren't willing to talk with you is because they were in the process of making a job change, or they changed companies. So they didn't want to start something that they were not able to finish. Now if there's an opening, there's a new person at the company that you were calling upon, and you find out who that is, and you might have a better chance. And follow up. I think a lot of times salespeople forget to follow up. If you leave a message, follow up in 2 days. If you're going to mail them something, follow up 3 days, 4 days after you mail it. And if you send them an email, follow up with a phone call the next day or follow up with another email. Look at your sent items folder in your email program and go, what emails did I send out that I'm not following up on? That's so important. Again, demonstrating value and commitment and persistence.
Yeah, I used to send out something and then I would follow up with a phone call. And I would say, I sent you some information. Did you happen to take a look at that? Sometimes they'd say yes. Sometimes they'd say no. Sometimes they'd say, I didn't see it. Even the ones who said yes, I don't think ever really looked at it. So I quit sending it and I would just open my phone call with, I sent you some information. Did you look at it? And they'd say yes. I was like, oh, that was interesting. But then it allowed me to have an opening to have the conversation with them. And, well, here's what it said, or here's what it was about. And can we have a conversation about that? So we don't always actually have to send out the thing to say we sent it out, and because they don't really look at that because you haven't caught their interest enough to get them to look at something. So I think the other thing we should look at is, where do we get these people, right? What are our processes? We might have a lead, right? They might have contacted our organization, and I think if you have people contacting your organization, you do a little bit of qualifying over the phone, but if they're qualified, you should be able to set up 90 to 95% of those leads with an appointment.
Right. And they might not have an immediate problem, or they might not think they have a problem, but the goal is to have a conversation with them and to be a resource for them to turn to when they do need somebody.
Well, if they called in, they've got something on their mind.
True. Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, the second one you might have is a referral. Someone that you've done business with says, why don't you give this person a call? My biggest piece of business I ever got was through a referral. And someone told me to call this person. I didn't know them. I was kind of scared to call them. I was just starting out in business. And they talked to me a week later. They said, did you ever call him? I said, oh, he said, call him. He's a great guy. So I picked up the phone right away. That's something I would advise. Don't wait on things. I grabbed the phone right away and I called him. He became one of my best long-term friends. I still get together with him, and I did hundreds of thousands of dollars of business with that company.
Wow, good for you.
So don't let those fall off. Don't let them wait. Referrals they're like fish. They don't get better over time. They just start to stink, and you feel bad about not calling them.
Yeah. And keep in mind that referral source. If you are given referrals and you don't follow up on them, guess what? You're not going to be getting referrals from that person anymore.
That's right. They won't be as nice as my friend was, who said, call him.
Right.
They'll just say, why didn't they ever get back to me on that one? So get back and let them know what happened on it. And then the third one is obviously cold calling. where you work off a list of likely candidates, the type of businesses that you do business with. And that goes into that strategy that Scott and I talked about the last 2 weeks, is that what is your strategy? Don't just pull a page out of the phone book. Everybody is not an equal candidate. Look at what they do, the size of their company, what their values are, and see if you can narrow it down before you do the work of making those phone calls. And it's not always just one person at a company. Maybe there's 3 or 4 or 5 different people you need to call at the same organization.
Yeah, that's great. And you've anchored yourself in more than one person. And if you are influential with one of those people, then they become a champion, and they start becoming an advocate for you when you're not even around.
Quite often I will go, if I have a list like that, I'll go to the highest person I can find. And let's say I get hold of the director of training or whatever, director of development, and they'll say, "Oh, you should be talking to Mary. She's the head of training." And I'll say, "Well, is it okay if I tell Mary that you told me to call her?" And he'd say, "Yeah." So then I call Mary and I can say, "I talked to the director of training and she told me to call you." Now I've got a conversation, right?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
know how you're getting. That's a great way to get attention. I talk a little bit about what you're trying to do during the call. 1, get their attention. 2, create some interest. 3, get them to talk. So you have to have questions designed in whatever your phone calling track is that get them to have a conversation. And this is a big mistake I think salespeople make. They think they're going to get interest by talking.
Right.
And they're going to get more interest by asking questions. And
Yeah.
then number 4, find a mutual interest. And then 5, try to set an appointment to talk again.
And I think a good approach with prospects is to say, I don't want to assume you have any problems in that area, or you even need my help. This is after you describe what you do. So you don't want to be assumptive, and you don't want to think that they're interested in making a change or that they have any problems. Don't insult them and say you have problems and you don't even know about it. That's insulting them. Another good approach is when you call them, say, are you in the middle of something? Is now a bad time? Now you're not sounding like a salesperson. What does a salesperson usually say? Hi, is it a good time? Everybody says, no, it's not a good time. They know it's a salesperson. That's why they move on.
Right.
If you go through the general receptionist or you're calling blindly, you don't know who to ask for. A great question is, I'm looking for the person who is ultimately responsible for blank. Who should I be asking for? That person is going to deliver you to the highest person that is ultimately responsible for that they know of. And that's the one that you want to get a hold of. Like you said, Bill, you want to call, like you call highest up in the organization as you possibly can.
And have something to say. So one of the challenges I found with many salespeople is they don't have a flexible phone track that they can work off of. They just make the phone call and start talking. And one of the things I do is help people to develop a phone track that they can flex off of a little bit. They're not going to get the same answer from everybody, but it gives them a direction that they want to take the conversation in, reminds them to ask if they can meet with them in a more long-term conversation, whether it's now through Zoom or in person, now that we're getting back into in person. You need to know, as you said, what are your goals? And then that has to be delivered through a phone track that you can follow. And I get a lot of pushback. I don't know if you do. I get a lot of pushback. I don't want to have a canned approach. Well, a phone track isn't a canned approach unless you sound like it's a canned approach.
Right.
If you can't change the tone and make it sound interesting, then you need to do a little work on your acting. Because if you're just reading the track to them, it's going to sound like you're reading it to them. But that should have a lot of questions that can then generate that interest for them.
Yeah. So that confidence in your voice is going to make a big difference.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
So do you have some resources that people can go to?
Yeah, I've got a web page that's going to share with you softening statements. So softening statements are a way that you can create a question that's pretty direct, but sometimes direct questions can cause prospects to get uncomfortable. So if you had a softening statement in front of it, or even a softening question, a reverse question, you're going to get more information. And when somebody says something that's important, you want them to be able to expand on it, and asking just simple questions and reverses to get them to talk about it is going to give you more information. So you can go to the website, winningatselling.com, go to the episode 463, and you'll have that link.
And the expert on prospecting was the person who used to have this podcast, Steve Kloida. And so if you order the book from our next ad, you're going to find out about that. And that's because this segment of the Winning at Selling podcast is brought to you by The Art of Prospecting, Your Guide to Getting in the Door by Steve Kloida. Steve Kloida was known internationally for increasing salespeople's ability to make solid appointments with qualified prospects. You too can learn this essential skill by ordering a copy of his superb book, The Art of Prospecting, Your Guide to Getting in the Door. In this book, Steve shares the top strategies and tactics he has developed, implemented, and personally tested with more than 1 million sales and prospecting calls. You can get his book on the website, theprospectingexpert.com. In addition, check out his other great online resources. Instant Sales Coaching, which will guide you through 5 online success modules. A guided prospecting process entitled Call Reluctance Transformer, and the Magnetic Selling Strategies Workbook, a detailed step-by-step guide to increasing your sales. Get any of these valuable resources at theprospectingexpert.com.
So as we close up the show today, our golden nugget is a quote from Teddy Roosevelt. In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The worst thing you can do is nothing. And making a decision not to do anything is a decision.
Yeah, we fight that all the time, right? With customers, especially in prospecting. I'm going to wait, I'm going to hold off, I'm going to think about it, all the things that put us off. But you need to help people understand that to do nothing is a decision, and it can cost you to do nothing. I have a pile of stuff on my desk I've done nothing about, and there are things that are costing me if I don't get to them at some point. So I love that quote. I love Teddy Roosevelt's quote. He was a person of doing, a person of action. So
Definitely.
great quote. Yep. Well, you can get all of the information at winningatselling.com. Look for our show notes there.
Next week, we're going to cover the rest of Chapter 3 in the book, Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. We're going to cover pages 62 to 78, and our topic is going to be on building and developing trust.
Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.